What's up guys, my name is Edwin and this is a complete crash course on Voiceflow. It will take you from a complete beginner to a professional in Voiceflow in a couple of hours, even if you have never used that tool before. Now, who is this random guy who's trying to teach you Voiceflow? Now, my name is Edwin and I have my own AI automation agency, Legacy AI, where we have been building real-world AI solutions for other businesses. I started out not knowing any of those tools. 4 months ago, I stumbled across Voiceflow and I just started building on it, and after some trial and error and actually learning from different sources and trying to put this together, I managed to become a certified Voiceflow expert and creator. And just a few weeks ago, I also managed to win the Voiceflow $1,000 Voice AI competition, which you can check out in the link in the description. So you guys, the roads, tricks, and tips behind this amazing tool so you guys don't have to spend hours and hours scrolling through the internet for that perfect tutorial. Okay, so we are at voiceflow.com, and the first thing you would do if you have an account to sign up is pretty straightforward, but I already have an account, so I'm going to sign in. And this should take you to the homepage. Now, again, don't get too overwhelmed with the entire workspace. I'll show you what's going on. Now, the only thing that you should do right now is if you click on this button, which is called New Agent. This is how you would create AI agents within Voiceflow. So just click New Agent and enter your project name. Let's say Tutorial Voiceflow. And for now, just stick with basic template and click Create Project. And now you're in the interface of Voiceflow. Now, I know there's a lot of things going on for now. Don't worry too much about it. Just ignore this. Click this little button to hide it. And wherever you see here, what you can do is literally just left click on the canvas. By the way, this is called the white space. It's called the canvas. And you basically just drag this and you just click delete. Now you just stick with this. You can't delete this. This is basically the start button. This is how you control where the conversation within Voiceflow starts. Okay, so I know there's a lot of different tools on the left, basically different toolbars. Again, don't worry too much about it. I will take you step by step, but now you have a blank canvas workspace to actually start building your first AI agent. Now, let me just actually kind of go through the entire canvas. And actually, before that, let me actually just kind of have a little talk about what Voiceflow is. Voiceflow, again, not trying to tell you guys to actually use the platform, but just honestly, in my experience, is one of the best platforms when it comes to conversational experience. So it's one of the best platforms to build these conversational agents, whether it's customer support or AI agents, right, for different use cases. And it matters a lot when control matters. Control over your conversational logic, as well as your AI steps. That's where Voiceflow really shines. And really, I recommend you, if you want to build any sort of conversational, whether it's text-based or voice-based agents, they recently had implemented the voice-based feature. But even for text-based agents, it is honestly one of the best places to build these conversational agents. Now, let me take you through step by step. As you can see on the left, this is what you will be doing, dragging every day. So you will see the agent step. Each of these is a node, an agent node, which we will cover in a bit. We have the talk, which is basically you got the message, which is basically how you would message to the agent, like basically a message block. You got the prompt block, image, card, carousel. Again, don't worry too much about the specifics. We will be, as we go along the builds, I will guide you each of these blocks. You also have listen, logic, and depth. Just think of these are basically your bread and butter. You basically just literally, for example, the message block, you would just literally click on it and drag it into Canvas, right? And yeah, so this is basically what you will be dealing with. On the right, you see there's the share button. So it's a place where you can share prototype. You can invite other people to come in here, and you can export this as a Voiceflow file. You can also publish this. Now, when you're ready, this will go, essentially when you click on publish, this will go live, and you can basically test it out as a demo and share the demo for other people. The run button, It's pretty straightforward. You basically run the builds, right? Again, I'm not trying to bore you with all these like minimum details. So hopefully, with those all of the ways, we can finally start building things. Now, in this tutorial, it's not going to be me talking about this different button. We are actually going through different exercise builds. So in this tutorial, you'll be getting 4 builds. The first build will be classic voice flow. I call it classic voice flow, meaning that traditionally Voiceflow is really good at, again, this conversational logic, conversational chatbot, right? So this will be a lead capture bot, basically a diet recommendation. So basically based on the user needs, it will recommend a diet plan for that specific user, and it will get their details such as the name and emails and recommend them. Basically trying to save this information in the CRM, in the database, in the newsletter, and try to send them basically a free course material. So this is what we call classic voice flow. So basically to get used to the core voice flow blocks. Then we've got the RAG agent. Now, if you don't know what RAG is, don't worry too much about it. This is where the bread and butter like of something called knowledge base comes from. So I'll explain this more in detail. So essentially, it's what it can do is you basically feed them knowledge in the knowledge base, and the AI will then be able to reference the information in the knowledge base and use that information to answer questions to the customers. So it can think of this like a FAQ support agent on the website, and it has all the information stored within that knowledge base, right? So that's what we call a RAG agent, and RAG stands just for retrieval augmented generation. So basically, it's a, again, don't worry too much. I'll explain all of this in detail. The third build would be an appointment setter. So you will be able to, after this build, you'll be able to think of it as like a dental appointment, a dental practice. You'll be able to fill in the form, and after you click fill in the form, you will be taken to a calendar link to actually book an appointment within the Voiceflow board. The fourth build is actually taking advantage of the new voice feature within Voiceflow, as well as the new agent step to build a customer support agent for Apple. But it's all within the voice capability. So this is the last, and I know this could be the most exciting builds, but again, save the best for the last, right? So I'll show you guys how to set it up. But for now, let's actually go for the first build. So within your blank canvas, I want you to start by just dragging the message block here. So basically you can just type any text message, so you can just say hi, and if you just literally connect from the start to this new block one, it will say hi, right? So if I just click start, first it will just display hi. So whatever you type in this text block, it will display out in the chatbot, right? So now, because I've already built this, the first thing I want you to do is basically copy this. Hi, how can I help you with your diet? And this will basically the initial greetings of the chatbot, right? So if I just literally test it out from here. Hi, how can I help you with your diet? Now, this is basically displayed from the voice bot. But what if the user reply with some message, right? Well, there needs to be a way to capture what the user has said. So this is where the blocks such as the listen block comes in. The listen blocks is essentially you are listening for the user's response. And one of those will be the capture block. So I want you to drag it here. Now within the capture block, you're basically capturing the user's reply. You have the options to choose between entities, which I will talk a little bit, or entire user reply. So as you can see here, it will capture the entire user's reply and save it to a variable. So for the purposes of this build, I just click on entire user reply. And the entire user reply, as you can see here, is being saved to something called last utterance. Last utterance is a variable, default variable within Voiceflow to store the last message being sent by the user, aka me, so basically the customer. So the last message that being sent to the customer, it will be saved to this variable called last utterance, right? So you see here, if I just type something, it will be saved to the last utterance. Now, it then goes to the new block 2, which is what we call a set step. Now, this is where magic happens. This is where the AI step comes in. So I want you to just literally drag it out And if you go to logic and click on set, now set variable. So you probably know set variable means that you're setting like basically something and information to a new variable, right? So basically you're assigning data to a new variable. Now once you click on here, you have the option to assign value expression. For example, you let a variable called x, you let x equals to 3. That would be a set variable. Or you can let x equals to something else, which is what we call the prompt. Now, a prompt is basically an AI generated response. So it will go through a large language model, such as GPT, it will output a response, and that response will be saved in a variable in this case. So that's what the set step is. So within the set step, I have saved the prompt carb or plant into the variable diet one. So to create a variable, you would just literally click here, create variable, and then you would just type diet 2, diet 3, diet 4, right? The name, and then you would just literally click create variable to create a variable within Voiceflow. Now to create the prompt, you will click create prompt, right? So we just click here. This is the, again, bread and butter. Better if I just show it on this canvas. This is literally the bread and butter of Voiceflow. Now, this is where you will create a prompt for your LLM, right? So you have the system prompt and the user prompt. Think of system prompt as how you want the AI to think, right? So it's persona, its identity, how the AI should think. The user prompt is how the AI should act. What action, what task should the AI perform in this specific prompt? That's the difference between system and user prompt. So right now, if you just literally just read the prompt, right? Oh, I think because it's the untitled prompt. Sorry, I need to go back to the carport plan. Yeah. So in this prompt, you are a highly intelligent user query analysis expert. That's how the AI should think, right? So I am a highly intelligent user query analysis expert. Okay. My role is to analyze the user's message and determine whether they want rapid fat loss or long-term gut health. This is important because the user would need a low-carb diet if they want to rapidly lose fat, and the user needs a plant-based diet for long-term gut health. So this is basically a way to determine if the user needs what's based on the user needs. It will automatically determine if the user needs a low-fat diet or a plant-based diet, right? So again, there are more formal ways to do prompt engineering. So this here is actually not the final way that you would write a prompt, but because this is the first time that we've been doing prompts within Voiceflow, I decided to go easy and just write a simple prompt, right? Again, I will teach you how to write prompts properly in a later blog. So the user prompt, again, now will be the action what the AI should act. Identify if the user wants a rapid fat loss or long-term gut health based on the query. Now, that's an action. Based on the query, last utterance, remember, that's the last response written by the user. If the user wants to lose fat quickly, reply with carb, right? And if the user needs a diet for long-term gut health, reply with plants, right? So that's another action. You should only reply with carb or plant. Otherwise, you'll be fine. Now, I know this sounds a little bit funny, but basically it's a prompting technique. That's something called emotion prompting. So it's something like if you try to exaggerate the situation and make it seem like you need to make it work, or like the whole project depends on you. My career depends on you. So like these kind of emotional prompting is proven by research to actually improve the accuracy of the AI response. So that's why I kind of do it. I'm not just putting it there for the fun, okay? And yeah, so again, hopefully you can tell the difference between the system and user prompt. It's like how you think, how the AI think, and how the AI acts. Now, within the prompt step, there's something called settings. So from here, you can actually select the GPT-4 model. In general, I usually just go with 4 and 4 mini. Oh, they released 4.1 and 4.1 mini and 4.1 nano. Wait, what? Oh, wow. Voiceflow, if you're saying this, that's I literally just find about this live when I'm recording this tutorial. Kudos to you. Anyway, that might change. I usually use 4 mini and GPT-4 for simpler tasks for many, for slightly more nuanced tasks for, but that might change for 4.1 and 4.1. I need to read the notes later, but anyway, let's stick with 4.1. Temperature, again, temperature. Okay, so a temperature is basically a parameter, as you can see here, to control the randomness of the answer. So the lower the number, the more deterministic it will be. So it will basically give the same answer again and again and again and again. Again, I don't want this to be too technical, but basically how large language models like GPT works is it predicts the next token, right? So if you output the phrase "hello world," it predicts the letter, well, technically token, but again, we don't want to go too technical. HELLO, right? So it predicts the next letter of the next token of the sentence, right? So there's some sort of probabilistic, aka randomness, with AI generated output. So given a 100, even if you give the same input 100 times, you might get slightly different response with the same input, right? So the lower this number, the more deterministic the response will be. The higher this number, the more random the temperature, the more random the answer will be. So somewhere I like to use is somewhere around 0.2 to 0.3, but for now we can just stick with 0.2. Actually 0.1, because you're only supposed to output two things. So max tokens is basically how many tokens that you're using in this response. I'm limiting to be using 256 tokens. Now, again, don't worry too much what a token is. It's basically almost like a word, but not like a word. But again, just think of tokens like a group of words for now. For now, or even if you want it to be like simple, just think of it like a word. But it's not quite right. But for the simplicity's sake, like it's good enough. Now, JSON output, I won't really talk about this in this video because again, don't want it to be too technical. But I highly recommend if you want to learn about this to watch the structured output videos that I've done in the channel, which I'll link in the description. Now, hopefully that gives you an idea of kind of what the prompt step does. So if I just literally test this out, sorry, I need to escape and test your agent. I need to lose weight, for example, right? So it should set the diet to, yeah, exactly. Now, because this it will either goes carb or plant, right? Now, we then go to this new block. This new block is a conditional block. Now, if we go back to the blank canvas, you will go to the logic block and you will click condition and you just drag it here. Now, condition type business logic. So what this actually does is you can build different if conditions. So if this scenario exists, go to this path. If the other scenario exists, go to the other path, right? So we would use something called conditional builder. So this basically say if variable is a, if let's say x equals to 1, goes to this path. Otherwise, else goes to the other path, right? So it's kind of like an if condition split within this block, right? So hopefully that makes sense. So this is basically what I've done, is that if the diet, so basically it's either carb or plant, contains carbs. The reason I use contain rather than equals because with AI, as you can tell, again, I told you, right, they're quite probabilistic. They can probably give you the wrong response. Not wrong response. Sometimes they, even extremely unlikely scenario, they will still kind of give you some sort of weird response that contains more than just carb or plant. So just to be a little bit safer, I use contains rather than equals. So if the variable contains carb, then go up, right? And then we just output, it seems you need a low carb diet. So that's exactly what happens when I tested out earlier with the AI agent. Then, so if the output is carb, it will go to this block. It seems like you need a low carb diet. What is your current weight and where you would like to go to in kilograms. Please also let me know your height in centimeters, gender, age, and how often you exercise per week. Now, I am not a biologist. I looked that up. To be honest, I looked this up. There is a formula to calculate. If you are a health expert, you probably know that there's way to kind of optimize your macros, right? So how much protein you should be eating, how much carbs you should be eating. So basically, what I'm trying to do is, given your weight, height, gender, age, and your activity level, basically calculate the optimal macro split for this specific person. So how much protein you should be eating, how much carbs you should be eating, and how much fiber you should be eating, etc. Right? So again, I'm capturing the entire user to Atlas Utterance. So basically capturing these information. Then again, I go to the next step, which is again a set step. Again, it's a prompting step. So this is actually where the main calculation happens, right? So if I just, again, if I just test the agent, yeah, I need to lose weight. Right, so now it will be around this stage. So I want to capture, so my current weight is, I don't know, let's say 130 kilograms. I want to go to 80 kilograms. I am a 180 centimeters male, 24 years old, and I go to the gym 4 times a week, right? Now, it would then go ahead, based on this calculation, and actually tell me my personalized weight loss plan. So the calorie diet would be, daily calories would be 2,450 calories, include the 500 division. You can read it yourself, right? I'm not going to read it out all, but basically this should be this is basically the macronutrient or the diet plan that I should be taking if I want to lose weight from 130 kilograms to 80 kilograms, right? So this whole calculation is actually being done from this prompt step. So actually have a look. At this prompt step, right? So let me just click it over here. Again, it's just another prompt that you can create called macro calculator. Now, within the system form, again, it's basically how the AI should think. So you are a nutritionist AI that calculates personalized macronutrition plan for weight loss. To follow these steps, you can calculate the TDE. Again, this stuff you can look it up if you're interested. It's not too much about Voiceflow, it's more about biology. So if you want to go Google it, right? But again, basically it's a way to calculate the macronutrient split and what my diet should look like. I then calculate the calorie deficit, determine macros, output, etc. Right? And I basically, so for context, I basically give out the formula to actually calculate the diet plan. Now you can pause and read it if you want to kind of copy paste it into your template if you want to. Again, by the way, you don't actually want, if you don't want to copy paste, that's fine. You can have the template of all these 4 builds with the link in the description below for free. Now, you can see here conversational history. What the hell is that, right? So basically, if you go to add and you add conversational history, then it will show up as VF memory. Now, remember how I told you last utterance is the default variable in Voiceflow that basically shows you the last message being written by the user. VF memory is a local variable. Well, I guess local and global is technically a global variable, I guess, from within Voiceflow that basically store the conversational history. The reason why I include conversational history variable is because to give the AI more context for the whole conversation, right? So the whole conversation as a context to guide the AI to calculate the diet plan for the user, right? I hope that makes sense. And now I basically have a user, which is, again, in prompting, I basically try to put this in one big prompt. Again, you shouldn't do this, but again, for simplicity's sake, it works. Now, what's another technique of prompt engineering is to show them examples. Like the more examples you actually give to the AI, example question answer pair that you can give to the AI, the better. So I'm trying to give an example. So this is an example of input from the user, right? Help me lose weight from 85 to 35 kilograms, etc. So this is the example of, no, I know it looks a little bit different, but because I want the AI to actually understand the rationale behind the calculations, right? So that's why I kind of include the explanations of how the calculation does, but I make it explicit for the agent to never show the calculation to the user. And again, I put it again in the end. Do not show the calculation, simply show the output, otherwise you'll be fine. Again, a little bit of emotional prompting, but this is basically just to show the AI the logic behind the calculations. And for the last message, I just put last utterance in so the AI knows to calculate the nutrition plan according to last utterance, which is the query of the user. Again, you can just change your settings, AI settings here. So basically, this is set this to the macro calculator, and it will output the variable, which will be the calculated diet plan. Now, the AI would then use a message block to say, enter your info so I can send you a free course of how to prepare a meal according to the diet plan, right? Now, if you look closely back to the demo that I showed you, you'll probably see a few buttons, right? You wonder, how do you do that? Now, that's another learning milestone in this core build. Well, it's almost like this build one actually shows you all the important builds in Voiceflow, right? There's a reason why I do that, right? And if you go to capture and then you go to choice. Now there's a very subtle difference between buttons and choice, but for now just click on choice. Now within choice, you will probably see something of a trigger. Now a trigger, I want you to think of a certain words that will trigger this conversation, this flow, right? It's literally what it means. So the trigger, I want you to think of this like an intent. So intent is basically what the intention of the user is, right? So if the user say, an example would be sentiment. If the user is happy, the intent would be happy. If the user is really angry at the bot, the intent would be angry, right? Would be furious, right? So that's an example. A simpler example would simply be yes, right? So the intent would be yes. So what I mean by that, if you click on this little button here, you can see that within Voiceflow. So Voiceflow use something called NLU, meaning natural language understanding. So it basically is a way for the system to actually understand what a yes intent means. Now, within an intent, you can have the intent name and description. Description basically say trigger this intent when the user responds positively. So the AI will actually know when to trigger this intent, right? Again, this description actually matters, as in like what you write here will determine how good your intents are. So most people actually think that in the description you can just write some garbage, right? It's just for yourself. It's not. The system will pick this up as well. Now, as you can see here, yes, yep, correct. These are basically examples to basically try to feed into the AI what a yes intent will be. Now, personally, like for something simple like yes, no intents, that's fine to use intents, or for simple cases, that's fine. For us, we usually don't use the built-in intents, to be completely honest with you. The reason why is I'm going to show you why in the second build and how we actually do intent classification within Voiceflow. But just to let you know as well, that if you go back and you can see all these different things that you can click on, if you click on intents, you can actually click on this gear button. You can actually like change the intent classification settings. So right now it's using large language models, which is RAG and LLM to, which is, think of it again. Don't think it's not too, don't be too technical, right? It's basically the more advanced way of doing intent classification. It used to be NLU, which is a kind of like almost like a traditional older approach to doing intent, but now we're using LLM, and you can choose your AI model. You can choose 4.0, but we use more tokens. You can use 4 mini, etc. And there's a prompt here. Again, I wouldn't actually encourage you to kind of change this. This is kind of good just out of the box for the purposes of this exercise. So you can change it if you want, but I would just take it, right? And then you can just click save. And yeah, this is how you basically add its intents within Voiceflow. Now, if you go back to the workflow, and as I said, there's a yes intent, and of course there's a no intent, right? So what you can do as well is that within the yes intent, there's a button. Now, what this does is actually adding a button that user can click on rather than typing the word yes, right? So if you just click the button, and you can enter the button label to be yes, right? And for the no intent, you can actually click on the button label to be no, right? Now, if you go back here, we've set up the yes intent and we set up the no intent with buttons that people can actually click on. There's also a no match. Now, what no match means is that if what the user says, like, is they didn't say yes, they didn't say no, they did something else, that will mean no match. That means that the AI cannot match what the user has said to a specific intent. So this is basically like a kind of like an error case, not error, but like basically the AI can't pick up what it's saying, and it will basically allows you to go down to a different path if you actually turn on this no match and you also click on follow path after it prompts. So you basically go to a third path after no match, right? Now, another thing is listen for other intents. If that is turned on, that means that anywhere else within the workflow, it can jump into this specific decision tree. So if you have listen for other intents open, if your conversation is somewhere around here, it's possible to jump from here, this node, to this node, right? So be very careful. If you don't want that to happen, I would just turn it off, right? Again, I will show you a better way to do this with intents in the second build. But for now, just stick with it. So basically, again, just to remind ourselves, enter the information so I can send you a free course on how to prepare menus according to the diagram. So the user, I nearly say the player, the user can actually say no. If the user said no and they don't give consent, then just say no problem, have a good day, right? But if the user say yes, okay, perfect, can I have your name? And from here, you would actually again use the listen, and you want to capture the name, right? So you drag the capture node. Now, remember how before we said like we just use capture user reply? Now I actually want you to use capture entities. So an entity is a variable with a preset like value. So what I mean by that is it's all abstract, right? But let me break it down. You can click on this plus button within entities, and you can click on create entity, and you can type something like name, for example. And from here, you can actually create your own data type. And from here, I would just say there's some predefined one by Voiceflow. You can have number, email, name, age, URL, ordinal, etc. So for now, I'm just going to click name, and I'll just click create entity. But I already created this entity, so it said it already exists. But for you guys, you can just go ahead and create a name entity. So the user will fill in the name, and the user will then fill in the email as well. Again, do the same thing for email, and it will create the email entity, right? So you now have the name and the email. Now, this is where the fun happens. Now, this is what we call an API step. This is if you're using Voiceflow, you will be using this API step every day, almost every day. So I will break it down step by step what's happening. So let me actually just again test out the entire flow. So again, I don't lose you. So hopefully I haven't lost you yet. So I'm just gonna test my agent again, right? How can I help you if you die? I just want to lose weight. So I'm just gonna. I am a 24-year-old male who wants to go from 60 to 80 kilograms to 60 kilograms. I am 180 centimeters and I gym 5 days. So, do I have everything? 30, I didn't say this email, yes, and how. Yes, doing the calculation and the meal plan, and then to your info, so I can, so I click yes. Can I have your name? So, Jen. I'm just going to put in my email 123@gmail.com. Oh, see, the reason why it's so good is that it's actually picked it up that this is a fake email. There might be a typo in the email address. That's because of how entities work. Because basically within Voiceflow, there is a predefined entity called email, and it's been trained that such an 123@gmail.com is actually a fake email. So let me actually just put in my other email. Alden, have a good day, right? So actually between me sending the email and Alden, have a good day, is that it actually went through what we call an API step. Like an API step is a way for you to send data from Voiceflow to an external app. Now, if you're not sure what that means, again, I've done a video breaking down between API and webhooks, and you can check the link in the description. But for now, an API step will use something called Airtable. So I want you to imagine kind of like the business logic behind this flow. So you start off by asking them whether they want what diet they want. You then provide some value in the sense that you basically calculate a diet plan. Then you want to get them on the newsletter, which is the name and the email. Now, I want you to think of them like you have to capture the information. You save this information in what we call a CRM, a customer relationship management. It's basically a database where you can store basically leads data, like the name and the email, in a centralized database, so you can send them a newsletter later. Now, if you haven't heard of Airtable before, don't worry. It's super easy. Like if you just literally go to Airtable and set up an account, and I would just click on a base, which is tutorial. So Airtable, as if you don't know, it's literally like a spreadsheet, right? So you have different columns, like you can set up columns like name, email, phone, gender, and pre-cont. Well, don't worry too much. I'll explain why I added pre-cont. It's for a third bill. Now, as you can see, it has Eddie, Jen, and I'll use this email.com, right? So this is exactly what we kind of previously sent from these API steps. Sorry, from this API step. So this API step send data from Voiceflow to this database called Airtable, right? And again, let me actually just delete everything here. And by the way, I kind of made the mistake here because I've added the curly bracket, so that's why everything is curly bracket. I can just remove this right now. Now, what you would do is within the API step, you would click. You have different options: get, post, put, patch, delete. Get is where you retrieve information. Post is where you post information, right? Put, patch is basically you update information. Delete is where you delete information. Again, if you're not familiar with the API structure, again, I highly encourage you to watch the API videos that I've made. But like essentially, you want to upload data from within Voiceflow to Airtable, right? So we just click post, and within Airtable, you would want to create your own link. So what I'll do is just click on this help button, and I'll just go to the API documentation. Within the API documentation, I click on authentication and go to create tokens. Click on create tokens. And from here, you would just click create new token. This is basically create your personal access tokens, right, for the database. And you would just say, just give it a name, just go to test2, just go to test2. Now add the scope, just for me, I'll just add everything. So basically what it does is basically saying, hey, what access do you have to this database, right? So are you allowed to only read the database, or are you also allowed to write updates on this database? For now, I'm just going to click on every single scope and at the base, I'm just going to, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to click on random one. I'm just going to click create token. But I've already created one, so I'm not going to create it. But you go ahead and actually create it, right? And after you created the personal access token, I want to kind of scroll down a little and actually click on create records, because we're creating a new record because we're posting data from Voiceflow to Airtable, right? Now, within the Airtable API, again, if that's your first time, that's fine. Just follow along what I'm doing. You can see that post, right, which we already done, post. Now we'll need a URL here. So what we're going to do is just literally copy this URL and paste it to here. So this is basically telling Voiceflow, hey, this is where you should be posting the data. You should be posting the data into this Airtable URL. Now, again, if you just follow along, you will never go wrong. That even rhymes. If you just follow along for this structure of this API, you will never go wrong. One thing that is authorization, your secret API tool. So you would just go from here and say bearer, authorization bearer, and the secret API token would literally be the personal access tokens that you just created within Airtable. Now for the second header, you will need to type in content type application JSON, right? So what that means is that you are basically telling Airtable basically, hey, I'm about to post data on the Airtable database, and the type will be of type JSON, right? So it'll be in the JSON format. If you didn't know, JSON looks like a little bit like this. It basically is a type of JavaScript object, right? So it will look like it has a lot of curly bracket. Again, if you don't know JavaScript, that's absolutely fine. Do not need code to understand this. So just follow along, right? And after you type in content type application JSON, what you would do is you would just literally copy this, and you would just paste it here. Now, one thing I want to mention is that within the fields, it will be in a key value pair, right? So you have the records and then you have the fields. Now you have the name and email. The left-hand side, the name and email, must match with the column of your Airtable. So you can see the name is capital, the N is capitalized, the E is capitalized. It must match exactly with the name of the column within the Airtable. And within the value pair here, you will literally just have name, email, which is the local variables saved within Voiceflow. Because remember, within Voiceflow, we have saved the name and the email. So now you just need to reference it, and you're good to go. And now you have the body, which is basically what exact data are we sending from Voiceflow to Airtable, right? Hopefully that makes sense. And you just click send, and we just click, one, and you just click send, and it was at 200 OK. So 200 OK just means that the API has been done successfully. Data has been successfully sent from Voiceflow to Airtable, right? Hopefully that makes sense. As you can see here, here you can see the one, right? So hopefully that makes sense. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That's basically the entire build of build one. And let me just go down to the kind of there. So if the diet one contains plant, because we kind of just go down this upper path, right? I just want to lose weight. But if the user actually wants a plant-based diet because of their guts or for whatever reasons, it will go down this path. It will say, it seems like you need a plant-based diet, right? So if I just go, let me just show you what I mean. Let me just test it out for the lower branches. I want a diet that's good for my gut. So now it knows to go down to plant route and basically say, it seems like you would need a plant-based diet. Again, it would do the same thing. What is your current weight and where you want to go to, and height and gender, and how often you exercise per week, right? So I'll just say, like, again, I am a 23-year-old male want to go from 90 to 60 kilograms. I am 160 centimeters and I gym 2 times. Oh, right, something like that, right? And then it will then go through again the calculations, right? But basically, instead of the macro split, we now have something called plan split, which is basically doing the same thing. Kind of like a plant-based weight loss plan, right? 90 to 60 kilograms, basically how much protein you need, how much fat you need, and yeah. And basically, again, you're doing the same thing. And the influence me so I can send you free courses and prepare meals. And if I click yes, then it will go through it again. It will capture my name and the email, and we'll go through the entire API request before. So again, before I kind of finish this build, I would just want to kind of show you the prompt, which again, you will have access to the template with the link in the description. But again, unless you want me to go, in case you want me to go through. Now here, I'm a little bit more I'm starting to a little bit structure the prompt a little bit better now. So what you would do normally in prompts is that you will want to have like roles. So for example, you will have roles. So for example, you're an expert plant-based nutrients. Calculate weight loss macro silently, differ only the key results in a friendly, actionable format. And these are some of the rules. There are the inputs needed, the calculation, kind of the logic behind it. And I said, do not show it to the user, and the output format, right? So what's the output format? And again, I'm taking into the conversational history as the context. And again, I'm providing the AI the example. So the example user query would be this 35-year-old female, weight loss, right? The height and how active they are. And that will be the example response given by the AI agent. And the last utterance would be the last query by the user, right? So very similar again to the macro split, but just the logic, the calculation is slightly different. Again, don't worry too much about the logic, right? This is just kind of to show you, like, so you have something to reference to. So yeah, this is build one of classic Voiceflow. I hope you've learned a lot from this, of all the core building blocks within Voiceflow, from entities to intents to API blocks to message blocks to capture to last utterance response to prompt steps, AI prompts, right? AI steps. Hopefully that gives you a good idea of what Voiceflow is capable of. And by the way, we've just scratched the surface. So yeah, if you're happy with build one, look over it. If you're happy with it, let's get straight to build two. So this is kind of familiar. I mean, that's kind of how the AI kind of trend actually started. It's actually with this specific agent. And I guarantee you, with your future career building these AI solutions, you will encounter a RAG agent. This is like the bread and butter between almost all of the builds that we do, right? So let's actually explore why it's so powerful. Now, in this example, I'm going to be building a support agent for apple.com. So as you can see, in apple.com, you can have different different products, right? As you probably know, you probably have like MacBook, iPad, iPhone, AirPods, etc. Right? So what we're going to build here is there's a customer support agent that will actually answers customers' questions based on what questions they have about their product. So, for example, if they have a question about a MacBook, if they have a question about Apple TV, if they have the questions about the billings and accounts, right? For example, Apple account, billing subscription, Apple repair, etc. Right? So these will be all the topics that will be covered within the support agent. So let's actually start doing this build. Now, as you can see, I've added a block here. Now, this is what we call a good practice. So before you build any Voiceflow builds, a good practice would be to actually set VF memory, which if you remember, is simply the conversational history of the entire build. You have the last utterance, the last message being sent by the user. Now, there's something called last event. Now, I don't want to get too technical, but literally just think about it like literally the last thing that happened within the Voiceflow build, right? So it's a good thing in building this build to actually set these kind of variables to no, which means that you're resetting the memory, you're resetting all these built-in variables to start from scratch essentially before. So what you don't want as you go with more complex builds that have multiple components, what you don't want to do is you don't want a scenario where, okay, I actually have some leftover memory, like this variable is actually something else, and then when you quote this variable, it's not what you expected, right? So you want to start from scratch. It's just good practice to just initialize everything to know. So this is kind of what this 3 blocks is. Again, this is just the set variable, right? So the variable, if you go to set step, this is the set step we've been doing. I know that we've been doing with prompt. And what you literally do is just click on value expression, and then you just select a variable that you want to set, and then just type no in there, right? So it's pretty straightforward. Now the flow then is going to be like this. Hi, welcome to Apple. Please let me know how I can help, right? So if I just test my agent right now, right, as you can see, there are two buttons that you can choose. Now, as you probably know, if you go to a customer support website, you will realize that most of the time, like you get help based on the specific needs that you want. For example, if you have a question about the product, you will go to the product team. If you have a question about the technical support, you will go to the technical support team. And you have something about the account support, then you will go to the account team. I forgot to add the button here. But here is essentially the same trigger, right? Because remember in the first bolt, we have choice and we have yes, the intent yes, and the intent no. Now, it's the exact same thing. I've added an intent called I have a question regarding the product, and another intent about technical support, another intent called account support, right? Now, if you click on the edit button as with before, all you do is put in the name of the intent of the question regarding the product, the description for the LLM to understand the customer would like to ask a question about the products in Apple, right, such as MacBook, iPhone, iPad, and give them a list of examples of utterances that the LLM can actually learn and actually, based on these data, the LLM can actually then classify intents, right? So as an example, I just test the agent. How can I help? Right. And again, I've enabled the buttons, but I can literally just type in here as well. So I have my MacBook won't start, right? No, actually, I have a question about the latest MacBook. Now, it should reroute it to here, the upper part, because it's a question about the product, right? So again, sure, let me know how I can help, right? So it's basically go down this path. Excellent. Now, of course, I didn't really build out the branches, but it will basically just be the copy-paste version of the upper branches. Now, before I even go further down the branches, I want to actually let you know something, is that we don't actually rely on these triggers. Now, I know that they have improved the intents, and usually that will work, right? With the LLM, like it's basically using a RAG system, because before, if you go back to the intents, used to be the settings of the intents, they used to do a hybrid approach, NLU plus NLM plus LLM, or natural language understanding. But now they're using RAG and LLM by using this default prompt. Of course, you can change the prompt here, and that's an improvement over the NLU, as I mentioned previously. So it makes the intent classification more accurate. But still, I personally don't use this intent. Well, if it goes to simple use cases like yes, no, then yeah, sure, go ahead, use this like trigger, right? But for me, like if it's something like more complicated, like more custom triggers like this one that you actually have to build yourself, like it's really specific, right? I have a question about the MacBook, right? This is such a specific intent that I don't think like the choice step or the intent step, built-in intent step would be a good way to do it. So normally what I would do, it's actually, let me just delete this. I won't delete it. I'm just going to drag this out of here. I'm going to actually use this instead. Now, what this does is basically the same thing, but hi, let me know how I can help. And then the user will type something. So instead of giving them a choice about what specific, buttons to choose from or which specific support, you actually allow the user to just type in anything they want, and then it will go through a set step where it will go through a prompt called intent classification. Now, what this does is basically this, the intent, but we explicitly use a LLM step to do the intent classification. So if I just go into the prompt and I literally just go to system, you are an intent classification system for Apple's official website chatbot. Your sole purpose is to analyze user message and categorize them into specific intent categories. Again, you basically have the more detailed prompt here. Now, this is where prompt engineering comes from. As you can see, this prompt is much more detailed than the prompts that we've previously done. Right, as we go further down the build, the better the prompts will become, because I'm trying to make it more and more realistic, right? Now, role. You are an intent classification system for Apple's official website chatbot. Your sole purpose is to analyze the tasks, right? So usually what you do in prompt is you have a markdown format to clearly define structures like the role, the tasks, and you number them 1, 2, 3, 4. The first step is to analyze the user's current message, right, which is the last utterance, which is basically what the customer wants to ask. Determine the primary intent behind the message, and then you classify it into one of the three predefined categories, which is basically the product, and then you basically got the technicals, troubleshooting, and the accounts and billings, right? Output only the lowercase intending. The system helps route system and context. Again, another good headings to put into prompt is context. So this gives the LLM an idea of why it is doing a certain things. So the system helps to route customer inquiries into the appropriate department with the knowledge base, and accurate classification ensures users get relevant information quickly, right? And then you can just read on, like, again, if you just use, again, you can have access to this template, so you can just kind of read it on your own time. But again, it basically just categorizes it into products, which is questions about the device and services, support, basically technical support, and accounts, like Apple ID, account, and subscription, right? And we give them some examples of how the prompts go and some notes. And yeah, and then oh, by the way, just to let you know, by the time of this recording, OpenAI has just released 4.1. So let me just kind of do this really quickly, like a quick sidetrack. I don't know how to say it. But basically, up to now, as I explained, you use 4 and 4 mini. But right now, GPT have released 4.1, 4.1 mini, and 4.1 nano. Yep, so now I want to show you this diagram, which is basically GPT 4.1. And basically, this is, and the y-axis is intelligence, is how clever it is. And the horizontal axis is the latency. Now, up to now, we have 4.0 and 4.0 mini. Now, usually we use 4.0 mini for kind of simple tasks and for more complicated tasks, right? But now you actually got the option to actually upgrade into 4.1 mini and 4.1. 4.1 mini actually has a slightly higher latency than 4.0 mini, but it's way more intelligent than 4.0 mini, right? 4.1 mini. So in the most case, like, it's almost the same as GPT-4, but like the latency is much worse, like much faster than GPT-4, right? And then you have GPT 4.1, which is the most clever model, but again, it's the same latency. So 4.1 is a direct upgrade to GPT 4.0, right? So that's that. And then it's also GPT 4.1 Nano, which is the smallest. It's a nano. It's called nano, right? Nano means really small. So the latency is kind of like the worst, but it's the best. Sorry, the latency is the best. So like it's take the shortest time, but also it's a dumbest model in a sense. So it depends on your use case. Now, if we back to Voiceflow, you'll realize that 4 mini use 0.08 tokens, 4.1 mini use 0.23 tokens. So it uses slightly more tokens, right? But it's more expensive, but then it's more clever. 4.1 nano actually costs less than 4 mini, but the latency is much better. So again, it depends on use case. But for the intent classification, to be honest, I'm just going to stick with 4 mini for now. And we don't need a really high temperature for this, so I'm just going to go to 0.1. And yeah, so that's the intent classification prompt. And therefore, this prompt basically can only output product, support, and account. So then we use a logic step, which we use the condition step, and then we just add a condition builder. So again, so basically this step is the intent classification prompt will save the output into the variable service. Now the service can either be product, support, or account, depends on the classification. So therefore, we use a condition step, which basically say if the variable service contains product, go to this path. Again, if the variable service contains support, go to this path. Again, it's basically really similar in a sense to this diet one, right, that we built. But again, this is kind of the way that we do intent classification usually, because this is a much more robust framework. So like, if the user go through this classification and then do their support, and then they have another question they want to ask, they will go back to this initial save use enter reply to last utterance, right? So that it goes through the entire classification again, as opposed to using something like the choices step. Now, I want to just mention really quickly on the side, technically, if you want to, you can build multiple workflows in Voiceflow. So you can just build new workflow and just like create workflow, and you will have 2 workflows, right? And as you can see, there's an add trigger. So what that means is that if you have a workflow here and you want to go to the second workflow, you can add a trigger where you can just right click, add trigger, And this will basically means that whenever you basically add an intent, right? An intent, let's say technical support, whenever this will basically be listening to the entire workflow, whenever the user needs technical support, it will jump directly to this trigger step. So it will jump directly to this new workflow that we've created, right? But personally, again, I don't like using that. So for us, like we're just gonna stick with this, right? So that it has more control and like higher accuracy in terms of the intent classification. Now, if the service contains products, let me just actually move stuff around here. Oh, sorry. Here, and if I literally just connect the two into here, right? And if it contains products, then sure, let me know how I can help. And so essentially, right, so you to be fair, we don't really need this step because we already kind of have the user reply, but this is really more for the choices step right here. But we can just actually delete this. And sure, let me know how we can help. I will connect directly to now. This is where I want you to pay attention. This is what we call a knowledge base. So what's going to happen once the system has classified what the user actually wants, now they're going to output, sure, let me know how I can help. And now it's going to use something called a knowledge base to answer questions. Think of a knowledge base as basically data that the LLM, the AI, can reference from to help the AI answer questions. So if we actually just go back and if we click on knowledge, this is where knowledge base in Voiceflow comes in. Now you can just click add data source. You can add a website, URL. You can add a sitemap, which is basically a collection of URLs. You can upload a PDF. You can even type your own plain text in, right? So what you can do is if you go to the click on URL, and we just go to apple.com, right? And we just import one URL. And as you can see, it's been added to data source, right? And you can just click on it and you can see chunks. Now, again, I don't want to get too technical, but chunks, basically how knowledge base works. If you literally think of it like a database, it's basically taken into account of the website apple.com, okay, apple.com, and all the informations here have been broken down into pieces, right? So if you literally think like the entire website, all the words and images, if I just take, let's say, the first header as one chunk, there will be one section of the information on the website. If you scroll down the MacBook Pro, there will be the second section, second chunk of the information available in the app website, and so on and so forth. So what the knowledge base actually does is to break it down, the information that's available on a website or a document, into different pieces or different sections, right? As you can see, each chunk here, this first chunk, second chunk, third chunk, they have its own chunk ID, meaning that if you can read here, so basically it means that each chunk has a unique identifier. So the AI can reference the best chunk that's relevant to the user's question. And for example, if the users ask, oh, I want to ask something about Apple Music, right? So it will probably use this chunk, right? Because that's a music.apple, right? So that's the chunk that's most relevant to the user's question, right? Now, you can also do a sitemap, right? So essentially a sitemap will look a little bit like this. So it would basically be a sitemap.xml, and you can basically scroll down here, right? So again, I'm not going to go too much into it, but you can just, if you want to, you can literally just add data source, sitemap, and then you can just do apple.com, sitemap.xml, and then you'll just click continue, and no URL form. No URL find this sitemap. Let me just actually copy paste in this. Yeah, as you can see, there's 820 URLs. There's a limit within Voiceflow. I can't remember the exact number, but it's something around like 200 or something. So you probably need to select the best URLs to go to, right? So now, the problem, again, I've shown you kind of the basics of like how do you add stuff into knowledge base. It sounds really basic, right? But there is a problem with this, is that as you probably know with the prompt that I've shown you so far, most of the prompts start with an HTML, start with some sort of like a markdown format, right? So if I just literally go to any prompts, if I go to the intent classification prompt, for example, you will see that they're all being really clearly identified into sections using markdown format. The same thing with knowledge base. Using a more structured approach. For example, one of the things that you can do is using a markdown format to kind of format your chunks has been proven to actually increase the accuracy of your AI in retrieving information. So what you actually want to do is not just simply copy paste the link and put it into the data source like I've done here. What you actually want to do is to format it, or what we call a knowledge base pre-processing. So document pre-processing, so the document, the data source itself is ready for the knowledge base. Now, one such site that you can use is something called Firecrawl. So if you just go to firecrawl.com and just sign up, what you can do here is you literally can copy paste a URL and you can just click run, and it will give the kind of website in data. It will scrape the website data and it will basically output it in a markdown format, right? So that's a document in a format that's proven to actually boost the accuracy of the AI response. So what we're going to do now, because again, we're going to be doing products, service, and account, right? So I think I'm just going to pick one specific product in the Apple side. We can close the sitemap. So, which let's say it's the MacBook Pro, right? So I'll just click learn more. And I'm just going to copy paste this link and I'm going to paste it here and I'm going to click run. Now, you might need to give it a bit, like see, you can basically have the markdown format. Now, I'm just going to copy the markdown, go back into Voiceflow, and let me just delete this really quickly. Let me just delete that. And I'm just going to add the data source, plain text, just paste the entire information here, and just import. Now, as you can see, now the data source, the chunks looks much better, right? So the content itself looks much better because they have been kind of divided into different sections, right? Now, let me just repeat the same thing for, actually, I can do this now. Let me just do it for kind of technical support. So if I just go to support, Apple repair, right? So then I just, again, copy this link and again, go to Firecrawl and do this, right? And click run again. I know my face keeps refreshing, but that's just because there's a lag. So don't worry too much about that. Add data source, plain test, paste the entire thing here, import, and let me just do the one final time, just bear with me. Go into support, go to billing and subscriptions, and just copy that, and then go to Firecrawl again, paste it here. Now, as you can see, because I'm just doing it for 3 things, so I can just manually do it, right? But you can imagine if we're using like 100 pages, we have to do it 100 times. So obviously that's not the way to do it. So we can set up some sort of make.com automation to actually do this, but I'm not going to cover it in this video because this is a Voiceflow tutorial, not a make.com tutorial. If you want me to actually build like an automation, just let me know, and I can do a tutorial on this. But for now, because we're just doing 3 things, so let's just stick with the manual method for now. So again, paste this. And there you go. You basically have a knowledge base of the MacBook, the repair, which is the technical support, and the support accounts, right? The billing and billings accounts. So if I just go back to the workflow now, and if you just literally just drag from the dev block, we've covered the API. Now we're using the second block within that, which is KB search. We just drag it, put it out here, and the question, which is basically KB search, what it's going to do is going to take in the user's question, which in this case will be the last utterance, the last thing the user said, and save the chunks. Remember, the chunks are the pieces of information that are most relevant in answering the user's question. So I'm going to save the chunks to a variable called, let's call it chunks, right? So what this, and then you can, obviously you can choose the chunk limit. Maybe it's not obvious. So chunk limit is basically determines the maximum number of chunks that will be saved to a variable selected. So if I choose like 1, that means that this KB search block will just retrieve output 1 chunk that's relevant to my question. If I choose 10 chunks, for example, then it would output 10 different chunks that are relevant to the question. Again, you need to make a choice of what works best. You need to do some testing to see what works best as well. In general, the more chunks you have, the more accurate your AI response will be. But again, that would mean that it takes longer, right? So again, there's some sort of balancing act there. So my suggestion is really just to test it, right, yourself. And I'm just going to delete that because we already have this. You can also have a not-found path. Basically, that means that if no chunks meets a predefined score, it will return a not-found path. So what I mean by that is this. Again, how this works, again, I told you, is basically the user sent a question. It basically uses the knowledge base to retrieve the chunks that are most relevant to the user's question. But how does the AI system actually knows what's the most relevant chunk, right? They use something called a similarity score. Basically, how similar is the chunks retrieved by how similar is the chunk being basically retrieved by the system to in answering the user's question, right? So the higher the score, that means that if your chunk score is 100%, that means it has to be perfectly aligned, right? So if, for example, if it's 80%, that means it's 80% there. If it's below that 80%, that means that we're labeled that as not found, right? So hopefully that makes sense. So for example, if they can't retrieve the chunks, we're just going to be say like, it seems like we can't find what you're looking for. Don't worry, I'll forward to human team. So basically, it's something that, okay, the AI actually can't answer the question. Maybe it's too specific. So it will be routed to a human support team to actually answer the questions. Now, once it retrieved the chunks, we actually need to send it to the AI to actually respond because you need a human to respond. This just retrieved the chunks. That the prompt step, which you can actually drag from the top to the prompt step, that's what's going to be generating an AI-generated response in text using the chunks as reference, right? So this is actually where the magic happens. Now, if I just click onto the response prompt, it will basically have the system prompt, your official Apple support assistant, and you basically have different roles. You're an official Apple support assistant. You have different tasks, right? Use the knowledge base, which is the chunks, to answer user questions about last utterance, identify relevant product links when specific Apple products are mentioned, provide accurate technical support and purchasing guidance, and maintain Apple's brand voice in all communications, right? And then you can basically have your own context, communication guidelines, product engagement, examples, right, and notes, etc. Okay, so this is basically what this does. Is using the chunks, the AI will generate a human-like response to answer the user's questions, right? And after that, you basically ask to say answer your question, and the user again can use the choice step to say yes or no. If that answers my question, it basically asks, hey, great, do you have other questions? And if the answer is yes, this goes down all the way back to here before the intent classification, because their questions, the second question that I might have might be unrelated to, let's say, products, right? Maybe the second question they have is about their account, their Apple ID account, right? So for example, I want to ask about the MacBook. And then they finish answering the customers about the MacBook, and then the customer basically say, okay, but my Apple ID is not working, right? Then it will need to be routed to the third path, right? So that's why we have built this intent classification to make it more robust, right? Okay, if you have no more questions, then we can just say have a great day, right? So I can just be like, have a great day, and end the conversation there, right? So hopefully that helped. So hopefully that kind of shows you the flow of how it works. Now, I haven't actually built out the support and the account, but it will be exactly the same. So what you would do is literally just copy this entire block and you would just paste it here. But I don't want to paste it here because it would make the whole flow too big and I can't, like, kind of takes up too much space. So what you can do if you're following along as an exercise for you now, as an actionable you can do right now, is build out the branches for support, technical support, and the account building. So that's my homework for you right now. Now, let me actually just show you one more time the entire flow then. Welcome to Apple. Please let me know how I can help. I want to know about the specs of the latest MacBook. Oh, we can't actually seem to find what we're looking for. So it must be... Sure, let me know how I can help. And then it goes down to the not found path. So the database that we have must have the chunks that retrieve from the data source must not have contained the data to answer this question. So let me just ask something like simple. So that's why the database, by the way, is so important. Because I only have added one specific link from the MacBook, but then it might not contain enough information to actually answer the specs. What's the latest MacBook? I want to know. I want to know more about the MacBook. Again, if we probably don't need this because that just sounds weird. Again, the chunks it's not really finding the chunks. So I'm just gonna lower the chunk score a little bit to like 40%, and let me just make sure that I can answer a question with the given knowledge base. So if I just go to the MacBook Pro, yeah, maybe I just ask how much is the MacBook. How much is the MacBook? Hopefully that will work. Nice. There we go. Great question. The starting price of the MacBook is this per month for 12 months. There's even a link to actually go to the official store. Nice. Get the MacBook Pro. Nice. If you're interested in comparing different Mac models, you can find the information here. Again, this is the compare Mac models, right? So this is exactly what I'm looking for, right? Basically giving the links to the user to make the choice that they want. Does that answer your question? I'll just say yeah. Wait, do you have any question? No. Then we just say have a great day, right? So yeah, so that's basically the rack agent that we have so far. Again, please, as a homework, build it out for the support and the account. Now, before I finish off this build, there's one thing I want to know, is that for this rack agent, there's actually a more advanced way of doing it, is to reduce hallucination. What I meant by hallucination is that AI actually doesn't know the information to answer the question, but the AI still make it up, essentially. So it happens all the time. So if you ask ChatGPT some questions, you're bound to eventually happen to you where they just make up some facts that's not true. So that's why hallucination reduction is super important. One of the way that you can do that is basically use something called a rack query optimizer. So even before we actually retrieve the chunks, what we will do is we actually just set the utterance that's ready for a rack query. So essentially it makes if I just drag this here and just drag this back here, so this step actually go through a prompt step. So taking in what the user just replied and just said, it basically saved into a prompt called rack query optimizer. Now this is really simple setup. It's very simple prompt. You can refine it if you want, but just to show you guys, based on the conversational history, again, taking into the conversational history as the context, and the user's last response, which is what the user just asked, generate a question that's ideal for retrieval augmented generation, right? So we are basically pre-processing the question so that the question itself is optimized for doing this database retrieval rack response, right? Hopefully that makes sense because sometimes user may ask something like question that's really fake and not very specific, and that's actually make the accuracy of the AI response worse, right? Another thing is that I know that we have been using this KB search step, but to have more control, we can actually use something called the API step. So what the API step actually does is that it uses what we call the Voiceflow knowledge base. Now, Voiceflow, as you know, it's really good software platform. They have a great backend. And if I literally just paste this into here, oh, cannot get. If I just do, hang on 1 second. If I just go Voiceflow, knowledge base API, you can read the docs here, right? And you can read all the docs here, and basically so basically here you can read the documentation, but essentially what's gonna, for example, KP Query API, right? So what's gonna happen is that every time you use the KP search step, you're actually just sending an API to the Voiceflow backend knowledge base and ask for a query of the knowledge base. So what you can do is you can directly send a post API request to the Voiceflow knowledge base with using this URL. Okay, you have a header authorization similar to how you send an API to Airtable. You would need your API key. How you can find the API key is if you go back, scroll down to integration. Where's integration? Oh, interfaces. And you click on API keys. You click copy. And if you go back to the workflow, you will literally just paste. Oh, I just separated the two. You can literally just paste the API key here with the authorization header, content type, and accept application JSON. So meaning that you are sending in a JSON data and you're receiving JSON input, right? So within here, you can set this is in JSON, right? Chunk limit 2. We've go over what chunk limit is, the maximum number of chunks to return. Synthesis false. Now, what synthesis means is that synthesis, if synthesis is true, that means that you're using the AI model to automatically generate a response. Now, I don't want the AI, I don't want like a AI processing step to generate me a response. I want the raw chunks, similar to the KB search, which is just giving me the raw chunks. So I can plug it into the AI prompt step to actually do the processing. I don't want to do it within this API call. So I'm just going to call synthesis false. Now, so therefore you don't actually need this, but just to show you guys what's available is the settings. If you do in this set this to be true, right? I'm just going back to false. Then you would need to set your own model. You can do GPT 3.5, you can do Claude, etc. You can set the temperature and you can set the system prompt here. Now, one important variable that you want is question. The question that you're basically your query to the Voiceflow knowledge base, which is last utterance, right? And you can basically click on capture response. And within capture response, you can define your own object, basically your own variable, and you want to on this response to be saved inside the variable called chunk prod, which is basically saying that, hey, I'm sending this API request to Voiceflow knowledge base, and I want to get back all those information, those chunks saved into a variable called chunk prod, right? So if I literally just send the information now, what's the price of MacBook? And if you click send, you can see that it's 200, meaning it's successful. And you basically have all these different metadata, but the one that's most important is chunks. So it's returning two chunks. The first one has a score of 57%, right? 0.57. You have a chunk ID, document ID, you have the link, and you have the source, right? And then you basically have all the information that you need, right? And then you have all these, because basically it's quoting where does the system get this information from, right? So hopefully that kind of gives you an idea like of a more advanced way of doing knowledge base. Again, the reason why I have this JavaScript, again, for those of you who don't know, who are completely new to this, don't worry. Click on dev, click on JavaScript, drag the JavaScript out. Now, what Java? Hopefully, I'm not explaining what JavaScript is. Like JavaScript is a programming language, right? So this actually allows you to write your own JavaScript, your own code when needed. Now, the reason why I do this is because when this returns, remember how I sent this API request, it returns a JSON. JSON is an object. Now, unfortunately, if you were to put this into the AI prompt step, it doesn't work because you need within Voiceflow, you can't just be accepting like an object data. You need to transform the data from an object, which is JSON, to a string, which is text. So JSON.stringify, meaning it will actually translate the variable chunk prod from a JSON object into a text format, right? I hope that makes sense. So yeah, that's basically kind of all the steps that you need to build your own advanced RAG agent. Congratulations, that's built to finish. We've come a long way and we've got 2 more builds to go. So let's get straight into it to build number 3, which is the appointment center. So now I actually want you to imagine yourself actually being in a dentist. And let's say you're going to a dentist website and now you're actually being told to essentially fill in the form and schedule a call, schedule an appointment for your dental practice, right? So let me actually just test it out. Now, this build, there's a reason why I cannot show you this build within Voiceflow because it uses something called a custom action, specifically a custom form. The form that, basically the form that we are going to try to fill in is only supported once this Voiceflow chatbot is hosted on a website. So for those of you who are kind of new to this, Voiceflow, the way that you actually deploy it onto websites is if you go to interface, you will basically, the way that it will be hosted on website is that it will be like a chat widget, like this, like on the lower right corner, test your agent. This is usually how you deploy it to the website. You basically copy paste this code, which is in JavaScript, paste it into your HTML code of your website. And then once it's in there, you will basically see a widget like this on the website. Now, the form that I built for this specific appointment setter can only be actually seen in an actual website. So I will basically, what I need to do to show you guys is I will need to host or build my own test website and host the chat widget onto the website so that you can see the custom form, aka the custom action that I've built. So to do that, I will need to access Visual Studio Code. So just bear with me as I opened VS Code. Now, I don't know if you can see the VS Code, but essentially it's quite a JavaScript. Again, you don't actually need to actually understand this, but I'm just gonna actually set this up the server right now. Now, I've gone ahead and actually copied this link, and I'm going to host my own website, right? And as you can see, this is the localhost 3000, which is something that I've hosted. I built my own website, right, which is called Chatbots, right? This is the only thing that matters. Again, you don't need to know the HTML code because this is just for illustrative purpose. What you would normally do for clients is that you would actually just you would basically just deliver the chat widget directly to users, to the client. So you won't need to build the website. As you can see, I've basically hosted my own custom form, right? So you say, hi, welcome to APC, and please fill in the information below, right? So I'm just going to put in my name. So let's say ed1@gmail.com, phone number is 1, gender is male. Do you have any pre-existing condition? No, right? So this is basically a custom form that you create. Now, the reason why, now again, it will basically say, oh, please select the time that works for us, right? And it will basically have a calendar link that built in within the chat widget that I can just select today, and I can book a time, let's say 11 in the evening, and you could just book an appointment from here, right? So the reason why, I'm going to explain a little bit why, that you can't actually just see it within the Voiceflow widget within here, is because it uses something called custom action. So let's actually deep dive into the build. And once we go from the start, it will go, again, do the practice where you set everything to null, you reset everything, right? And you say, hi, welcome to APC Dental Practice. Please fill in your information below. Now, this is where the form happens. It uses something called a custom action. Again, don't worry too much about it. It's a bit too technical. It's quite technical. It can take up some code. But usually what happens is, so I want to explain something, what is trace and what is an action. You basically have a chat widget, right? That's going to be on your website, right? And usually what happens is within the chat widget, the user, aka you, is going to type something within the chat widget, and it's going to send it to the Voiceflow backend, right? Hopefully you can see that. Basically, that's just VF, right? And this is what we call an action. Well, if it's way too small, the word action. Hopefully you can see that. Yeah, sorry. It's going to be, yeah, there we go, an action. So an action is basically whenever a user types something within the chat widget on the website, and it sends that information to the Voiceflow backend. This is the brain, right? And the Voiceflow is going to do its thinking and then send a response back. Now that response is what we call a trace. Trace, right? Now, how does the chat widget can communicate with the Voiceflow backend? It's actually through something called DM, Dialog Management API. So it isn't just an API. So it's just basically an API, right? So it's a way to allow communication between the Voiceflow backend and the chat widget frontend. And an action, whenever you type a message, you're basically doing an action, right? So a custom action in this case would be an action that's not a kind of a default action within Voiceflow. So if you send a text message, that will be what we call a default action. A custom action is something that you made outside of Voiceflow supported action. So for example, the form, it will be a custom action because you made that custom form, right? So that's kind of like custom input from the user to the Voiceflow backend. So hopefully that gives you an understanding of what's going on. And usually custom action is of type response, meaning that the user actually types something to Voiceflow and Voiceflow gives the response back. It's basically a trace. So hopefully that kind of clears the idea a little bit. So within the Voiceflow, you will have something called the custom action, which is a custom response from the Voiceflow backend. Now you can name it extension 1 and go complete. Again, what you would do is literally just drag the custom action, drag it here, and then you can type the custom action name and the path name. Now, where the main magic happens is actually Visual Studio Code that I can hopefully you can see. Okay, so basically what's happening here is you will have a JavaScript code called extension.js, right? So it's JavaScript, and it will be of type response, right? Because the response will basically be the a form. So it's like if it's a message or if it's a form, it will be of type response, right? And then basically don't worry too much. This is just how you customize it, how it looks. It's not too important. The important part is here. So you basically specify, okay, I'm going to be using a form, which what we call a form container, and I'm going to include the following variables: the name, the email, phone, gender, and preconditions. So these will be the necessary variables to capture it within the form. And it will basically go through this code. Again, you can use ChatGPT if you want to just literally copy paste this code, plug it into ChatGPT to kind of explain it to you. But essentially what this does is that after you finish completing the form, it will basically save those variables, right, into a Voiceflow variable, because the user type in those like data, they need to be sent to Voiceflow, right? They need to be saved within the Voiceflow workflow within the Voiceflow canvas to actually be able for us to be able to use those information. The reason why is because we are actually capturing those information, the form data, and sending an API request to Airtable again, which you remember is our CLM. So if you go to the Airtable that we've been using, now you understand why there's a pre-con column, right? So we basically send, as you can see here, there's a new row, basically the name, the email, the phone number, the gender, and whether they have a precondition or not into this row, right? So we're basically capturing the information that the user has provided in the form into a CRM, right? So hopefully that makes sense. So it's sent to the Airtable, and then after it's been sent to the Airtable, you basically ask the user to select a time that works for you. So we're basically embedding the Kennedy link. This is my own Kennedy link, but you should be able to set up your own Kennedy link. If you go to https://kennedy.com and you click sign up, you will create your own Kennedy link, and you could just paste the URL here to have your own Kennedy like meeting link. Now, in order to actually show it within the chat widget, we need to use something called iframe. I appreciate that the third build, this build a bit technical, but I guess like that's the it's not hard, right, in terms of the functionality, but it's a little bit more technical. It requires a little bit more coding, especially the custom action. I appreciate that. So again, if you're completely new to this, don't worry too much if you're lost. There are ways to actually build this form, to do the custom form without actually knowing how to code. But again, I will have all the codes that you would need in the description, so you can literally just copy and paste the code, and then in the IDE, like Visual Studio Code, just paste it there, or ask ChatGPT to basically explain the code if you want to understand it, and then you can get it running right away. So you don't actually need to understand the code, right? Again, same with here. You don't actually need to understand the code. You can just literally copy what I have here and just paste it into your build if you want to. But if you want to understand it, it's basically using something called an iframe. An iframe is something that can display embedded within the chat widget. Basically here, if I want to embed the Kennedy link within the chat widget, I need to use something called iframe. This is an iframe, right? And within the iframe, you're basically saying the opacity, the height, border, right? This is just like styling how it looks like, right, on the website. And you will basically use this select and day or time. This is just basically, if you read the Kennedy documentation, this is how you should do it. But again, you can just copy what I have here, and then you basically provide the Kennedy URL, right, and allow full screen, right, which is the meeting link that allows the user to actually book an appointment, right? So that is how you can build a simple appointment setter. When I say simple, it looks simple, but as you know, there are custom action, and there are codes around here like these, right? That you can just copy paste what I have. But essentially, hopefully, at least you get the trace and action. You actually understand kind of what's going on really behind the scene, and you have something to reference to when you do want to build your own custom form within Voiceflow. Now, this is the third build. The fourth build, the last build now, is what we call a voice agent, right? Or it can be a chat agent. Now, Voiceflow actually recently just released something called the voice function. So the voice function is something that, well, you can just talk to the agent. So right now you can see it's text agent. So what we can do, if we go back here and we go to interface, and if we scroll down here and we click on modality and interface, we can just click from chat to voice, right? And now when you start a call, it will be a voice agent, right? So again, this is basically an Apple support agent that uses. So it would be an Apple support agent that actually uses the agent step, right? And again, you can basically delete everything here. So basically, again, not delete, but this is just like initialize, data initialization. And you can have like basically an entire customer support team built in like a voice agent. Now I'll break it down into what it looks like, but let me just like do a demo of what it looks like first. So just bear with me. Okay, let me just start the call right now.
Hello, thank you for contacting Apple Support. How can we help you today?
There's something wrong with my MacBook. I think I don't know what's wrong. It just won't start.
I understand how concerning it can be when your MacBook won't start. Let me connect you with our hardware support team. They'll help troubleshoot the issue and get your MacBook back up and running. One moment while I transfer you. Based on Apple's support documentation, when a MacBook won't start, there are a few steps we can try to identify and resolve the issue. Hand chat. Try this. 1. Check the power connection. Ensure your MacBook is connected to a working power adapter and outlet. If possible, try a different power adapter or cable to rule out issues with the charger. 2. Perform a force restart.
That's great. That's great. That's great. Actually, now I understand. Now, but there's still a problem with my Apple ID, so I can't log into my Apple account. So can you help me with that?
I understand that you're having trouble logging into your Apple ID. Let me connect you with our account and billing support team. They'll assist you in resolving the Apple ID issue. One moment while I transfer you. Let's address your Apple ID login issue. Steps to recover your Apple ID. 1. Go to iforgotapple.com, a tips on iforgotapple.com. Enter your Apple ID email address. Follow the prompts to reset your password or unlock your account. 2. Check for two-factor authentication. If enabled,
Yeah, so as you can see, basically it's basically what we've done so far, but it basically like what we do in two, but we kind of just take one step ahead and actually manage to do it in quite a small workflow, as you can see. So how it works is you actually take advantage of the agent step. Now again, I understand that it might not be the most optimal voice flow, but for demonstration purposes, that's pretty good. So if we just click on agent and actually just drag it, and you will see create new agent. Just click on it and you will see here. Now this should be really familiar with the prompt step because it is really similar. Now I'm just going to quickly explain what an agent is and what the hell is an AI agent, right? But actually what an agent is. So an agent is actually think of it like a LLM in here, but they have actually full decisions of which tool to use that's available to them. So let's say you have tool number one, tool number two, tool number three that's connected to the LM. And the LM knows that it has these three tools that it has access to. Now, the difference between an LM workflow and an AI agent is that agent can use something called function or tool calling, meaning that without actually explicitly telling the LM what to do, it can decide based on the user's input which specific tool to pick, right? So you have a tool number one, tool number two, tool number three, and the user asks them a question, then it will be able to access tool number one because of its own reasoning, right? Whereas the traditional LM workflow is quite linear, right? So if you go to this step, then you go to this step, and then if this happened, then do this. If this happened, then do this, right? So this is where the difference is that the AI agent have more autonomous capability of allowing to choose their own functions or choose their own tools, right? So within the Voiceflow agent step, you can actually add the instructions of what to behave, and you can add paths, meaning that you can basically let the LM knows that if when this happens, trigger this path. I trigger this path and this happens, right? So this is exactly what we've been doing in this agent step. So what we've been doing traditionally is that within the team of AI agents, we usually have something called a supervisor agent. So the supervisor agent, if you think about it, was very similar to a customer support supervisor. So think of it like when you call in emergency services, the operator, like for example, 999, the operator will basically say, hey, do you want a fireman, police, or ambulance, right? So similarly, the supervisor agent would take in the user's response and based on the user's response, classify it into which specialist agent that it should route the users to. So it's in a way, it's very similar to the intent classification that we've been doing in Build 2, right? Because remember with the RAG agent, remember we do this intent classification and then we do the different if logic. It's basically what's happening here, but instead of using strict logic, this is using the autonomous capability of the agent, meaning the agent will know when to route to this specific specialist agent. Now, if you see the instructions of the supervisor agent, again, with this AI agents, you need to actually prompt it a little bit more detailed than you would normally do in a single prompt step. Again, that's because the supervisor agent is the overarching agent that basically does everything, right? So again, we would have a role. So basically, what's your current role and how you should greet your customers, right? Greet customers in Apple Signature Professional yet friendly tone. So basically, giving it the persona, analyze technical product or account detail intents, and then route to specialized Apple support agents internally and maintain seamless context across all interactions, right? And you basically give it more instructions, for example, the responsibilities, how the conversation should flow, the brand alignment, what are the rules of routing to this hardware. So for example, trigger to the route to hardware support agent when this happened, etc. Again, you will have to access your template, so please follow along, have a read through the prompt, and try to understand the structure of the prompt. Right? It's usually good to actually have some sort of keywords, so to kind of like a tip to the supervisor agent when to route down to the specialist agent, right? So you will have these handoff rules, right? So if the issue unresolved after 2 attempts, escalate to human, etc., right? And then you provide, as with every prompt, examples, conversation examples. So for example one, my iPhone 15 gets really hot when charging. Then the supervisor will say, thanks for reaching out. Let me connect you with a device support team, which is basically the hardware support team, right? So it will route to a hardware agent. So you give them a few examples, and again, because this is voice, so if the platform is Twilio or Web Voice, then you would follow these instructions to optimize with voice, right? So basically, because the way that we speak in like text, when we text each other, and the way we speak over the phone, right, with someone else, obviously is very different, right? To how you would do it like in real life as well. So that's what I kind of put in this notes to make it clear that this is exactly what you should be doing. And within the settings, what I found is that GPT-4 Mini is simply not good enough for most agents. I would recommend GPT-4. Again, you feel free to experiment with GPT 4.1 or GPT 4.1 Mini. I'll just stick with 4 for now. And now, within the supervisor agent, you will have different paths. So, for example, it can route to the hardware support path, and basically, description would be transfer control to the hardware support agent for Apple device troubleshooting and different pairs. So, when this basically letting the LLM knows when this happens, you should route the supervisor agent to hardware support, right? Again, look at the structure that I've been using. Description of what's going to happen, usage, what the exact input variables are, or the output variables are from the hardware support, or the keywords, trigger words, example triggers. These are all important parts of a prompt or an instruction to the AI agent. You can also select the required variables. So basically, what variables are needed to essentially what variables are essentially needed to trigger this workflow, right? So, for example, in this case, before moving on to the hardware support agent, the supervisor agent would require the original customer query about hardware, right? Same with software support, same with account billing support agent, and the same with sales agent, right? So you can read through, you will have access to a template. So again, just read through it, kind of, and try to really understand what I'm doing, why I've structured it this way, right? And yeah, so basically you have 4 different routes. I'm not going to read the prompt step by step because that would take a ridiculous amount of time, and that's not the best way for you guys to learn. And once you've gone to the specialist agent, again, the same thing. You will have a role prompt, like you're the hardware support agent now, and these are the rules that you should be taking, right? How you can access the knowledge base, right? You can toggle this on and off. So when you toggle this on, it's basically saying to the agent that, hey, trigger this knowledge base when the customer asks you a specific question about hardware issues with Apple, right? So basically letting the agent know when to actually go into the knowledge base, right? And conversational flow, hardware, it's basically really similar to the supervisor prompt, but it's even shorter, right? Because this is specialist agent. Now, the same thing repeat for the software support agent, accounting billing agent, and sales agent, right? So again, you can read the prompt with the templates, try to understand it, right? Now, what I also did was route to supervisor agent. So this basically, you know how like we have configured something similarly from the supervisor agent to the hardware support agent. But also, of course, if the user like now has resolved their hardware problem and they want to go back and ask a different questions, well, they kind of need to go back to the supervisor agent and route it to other agents, right? So if a use case of this would be, for example, not use case, but like analogy would be, let's say you need both the ambulance and police, and like you call 999 and or 911, depends on where you are, and you basically say you need the police, and the police basically solve the problem, but then you also need the fireman. Then you would transfer you back to the operator and say, hey, I actually need the fireman as well, right? And then the operator will basically route you to the fireman, right? So similarly, if for some reason you also have a problem with your Apple ID, then from the hardware support agent, you can take the route back to the supervisor agent, classify your needs again, and then put you back to the accounting billing agent, and you can repeat the whole process until all the problems have been solved for your specific use case. So again, I know I didn't like kind of dive deep into the prompt, but like I really don't think that's the best case to just read it through line by line. But for you to actually understand the structure of the prompt, right? The role, what are the core rules, like the responses, your conversational flow, the scope, and your response template, right? These are really standard, and then it applies to your use case. Much easier, much easier for you to actually understand this than just to like line by line me reading you to it, right? Now, the last thing I do want to mention is you have something called function. I didn't mention this within whatever, but basically functions are ways that you can write code within JavaScript to do certain things. Now, if you can't code, don't worry. If you're not technical, don't worry. There's lots of community-ready functions. If you just click on this button, community, there's lots of community-ready templates for you to use. So, for example, let's say I want to actually save the information into a CLM like Airtable, right? So I would just type Airtable, and you can see that you have a create record, right? So, function that's been made for you. So if you just click on this button, you can edit this function. And a function, essentially, what it does is it takes input variables, in this case, the booking category, booking item, date time, etc. These are all the input variables. It passes through this function, it does some processing, and it outputs some variables. So the booking ID and the record will be the outputs after running this Airtable function. So, for example, what this Airtable function does is it takes in all these input data, and it will save those data into an Airtable that you've created. So like this one. So the two ways to do it, right? So you can either do the API calls or you can run something like this specific function, right? So that's another option for you if you want to be more precise, if you want more control, then the function step could be a nice way to start. And it's easy, right? Because you don't need to write it again. You can just use the community template over here, right? There's lots of different templates. You have Shopify, you have Make.com, you have Intercom, right? So just use the template and adjust the variables to your specific use case, right? I hope that makes sense. So yeah, that's pretty much everything that you need to know about Voiceflow. I know I kind of rushed through the last build a little bit, but honestly, again, I hope you, as long as you get the main concept behind it, the exact way that you prompt the agent is not that much of a difference. So hopefully you've learned something from this Voiceflow tutorial, and you now, and first of all, congratulations as well. You finished 4 builds in under around 2 hours. So congratulations. You should now be really confident and happy, proud of yourself for achieving this kind of Voiceflow mastery. And I wish you the best of luck of your future Voiceflow builds. And now, if you enjoy this type of content, remember to like and subscribe. And yeah, let me know in the comments if you have any questions, any problems, concerns, let me know, and I'll try my best to answer them. And yeah, that's it for me, guys.